Hello everyone, Miss C here today, and we'll be doing properties of multiplication. So in our agenda today, we have materials, joke of the day, and objectives. And I'm going to start with the objectives. So by the end of the lesson today, I can use properties of multiplication to identify each problem and solve. So throughout the lesson, we will be going over this, and by the end of the day, you'll be able to master this fully. Moving on to the materials, we have paper and pencil like always, but again, if you had anything to write with and write on, that would work just fine. And if you wanted to follow along on an electronic device, that works as well, as long as we have participation. That's all I ask for. And then I have the joke of the day. What do you call brothers who love math? So I'll let you guys stop here for about 2 minutes if you don't have your materials, and if you already do, that is okay. Just think about the joke and what the possible answer could be. So moving on, our joke of the day answer is algebros. So what do you call brothers who love math? Algebros. So it's like algebra, but instead of algebra, we put bros at the end just because you call brothers who love math algebros. Just something fun that I made up for today. Hope you guys like that one. That one was a little bit difficult, but it's okay. Moving on, we have our start thinking section. So I have a few questions here that I want you guys to start off with. This is going to be something we review before we start our lesson to get us thinking about what today's lesson could possibly be about. So I'm going to go over the questions with you, and then I'll give you guys some time to review those on your own. So the first one being, are 5 times 4 and 4 times 5 the same? Second, find the answer for 5 times parentheses 3 times 1 parentheses, and then the next one is find the answer for parentheses 5 times 3 close parentheses times 1. And then the last one is when you multiply a number by 1, what will it always be? So you guys could stop here for about 4 minutes and think about that on your own, write those answers down. This is going to be, again, something like a preview to what we will be doing today in a little bit more depth moving forward. So if you guys could stop here for about 4 minutes, that would be great. All right, I hope that was enough time for you. So moving on to the start thinking answer. So the first one was, are 5 times 4 and 4 times 5 the same? So the answer is yes, because 5 times 4 is 20 and 4 times 5 is also 20. So those are both the same. They're gonna both equal to 20. So yes, they are the same. And then the second question, find the answer for 5 times parentheses 3 times 1 equals. So first, again, if you remember PEMDAS, we're always going to do the parentheses first before we multiply. So then I have 3 times 1 equals 3, and then 3 times 5 would give me the answer of 15. So then the next one is find the answer for parentheses 5 times 3, close parentheses times 1. So again, I'm going to do what's in the parentheses first. So 5 times 3 is 15, and then 15 times 1 equals 15. So if you saw those two, they look very, very similar. The parentheses are just in a different place. So moving forward, I'll explain that further, but the answers for that were the same. And then the last one being, when you multiply a number by 1, what will it always be? So it will always be the number that's not 1. So basically, it'll be the number that you're multiplying 1 by. So if it's 1 times 5, it'll always be 5. So anything times 1 will always be that number that's not 1, basically. Moving into our lesson for today. So these ones correspond with what I had in the start thinking section. So we have 3 terms that I want you guys to understand thoroughly. So if you wanted to stop here for a few moments actually and write that down, that'd be super, super important, because these are going to show up a lot in math, and then you should definitely know the difference between them. So the first one is commutative property of multiplication. So that is changing the order of factors does not change the product. For example, 2 times 1 and 1 times 2. So if I go back to this slide, I asked you if 5 times 4 and 4 times 5 were the same. So for the first question, I did ask you a question that involved the commutative property of multiplication. So basically, if you change the order of something, it'll still stay the same in multiplication. And then moving on to our next one, we have the associative property of multiplication. So that's changing the grouping of factors does not change the product. For example, 2 times 1 times 3, and then the parentheses are around the 2 times 1, and then 2 times 1 times 3 again, but the parentheses are around 1 and 3. So this one corresponded in our start thinking with the 2 find the answer questions. So it was the same variables, but the parentheses were put in a different spot, but we still got the same answer. So then moving on to our last one, we have identity property of multiplication. So the product of 1 and any number that the product of 1 and any number is that number. So for example, 9 times 1 will always be 1. So again, like I said earlier, anything times 1 will always be that number. So if you guys want to write it down, I'll give you guys a few more moments, but knowing the difference for these are going to be super important on moving forward into our lesson. So if you guys wanted to write down, you could just write down like commutative property. You could write the example if you wanted to, but knowing the difference, like again, commutative property was if you change the order, it doesn't change the answer. The associative property is if you change the grouping, that one doesn't change the answer. And then again, for the identity, anything times 1 will be that number. All right, so if you guys need extra time, you guys can stop here for a little longer, but I'm going to move forward with the lesson. All right, moving on to the examples of commutative property. So we have on here 2 times 3 and 3 times 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the answer for the left side and the right side of the equal sign. So on the first one here, we have 2 times 3, and then I'm going to find the answer for 2 times 3. And then I'm going to, on the other side, find the answer for 3 times 2. So I hope that it makes sense for you guys on what I want you to do. And then I want you to do them for all of it. So I'm going to go down and then go over each one with you, and then I'll move on to the other side. So we have 4 times 2 equals 2 times 4. So again, you'll find the answer for both sides and then write that answer there. And then I have 3 times 5 and 5 times 3. And then I have 4 times 6 and 6 times 4. And then I have 5 times 5 and 5 times 5. And then I have 2 times 9 and 9 times 2. So I'll let you guys pause here for about 4 minutes. If you need more time, that's okay as well, to go over those answers and write them down for each side of the equal sign. All right, so I have the answers out for you here, and we'll go over them together. So the first one, I have 2 times 3, which gives me the answer of 6. And then I have 3 times 2, which also the answer of 6. So those are equal to each other. And then I have 4 times 2, which gives me 8. And then I have 2 times 4, which also gives me 8. So those are equal to each other. And then I have 3 times 5, and that gives me 15. And then 5 times 3, which also gives me the answer of 15. And then I have 4 times 6, which gives me 24. And then 6 times 4, which also gives me 24. And then I have 5 times 5, which is 25. And then again, 5 times 5 on the other side, which also gives me 25. And then the last one, I have 2 times 9, which gives me 18. And then 9 times 2, which also gives me 18. So those are all examples of commutative property of multiplication. Those all are the correct examples that we use to show this. Moving on, now we have examples of associative property of multiplication. So for this one, I want you guys to do the same thing that you did with the last one. You're going to set them up just like you did prior to doing the right side and the left side answers, and then you will see if they're equal to each other, and if it is, then it is the associative property of multiplication. So on the first one, we have 2 times parentheses 5 times 1, and then we have parentheses 2 times 5 times 1. And then the next one, we have 4 times parentheses 2 times 3, and then parentheses 4 times 2 times 3. And then the last one, we have 5 times 5 times parentheses 6 times 2, and parentheses 5 times 6 times 2. So again, I'll give you guys about another 3 minutes to stop here, 3-4 minutes to stop here, and review those on your own, and then again, I'll come back with the answer. All right, so for these, I'll go over them with you. So we have we're going to do the parentheses first, always for this, because we always use the PEMDAS to associate this with that. So my parentheses are going to be 5 times 1, which gives me 5, and then 5 times 2 gives me 10. So then that's what's on my left side. And then on my right side, I have 2 times 5, which gives me 10, and then times 1, which gives me 10, because 10 times 1 is going to be 10. So then those are equal to each other, so it is an associative property of multiplication. And then the next one is 4 times 2 times 3, and then again, I'm going to do the parentheses first. So my 2 times 3 gives me 6, and then my 6 times 4 gives me 24. And then on the right side, I'm going to do my 4 times 2 in my parentheses first, which gives me 8. And then 8 times 3 gives me the answer of 24. And then for the last one, we have 5 times parentheses 6 times 2 equals parentheses 5 times 6 times 2. So I do the parentheses first. So 2 times 6, or 6 times 2, gives me 12. 12 times 5 gives me 60. And then on the right side, I have 5 times 6, which gives me 30. And then 30 times 2 gives me 60. So all of these answers were associative property of multiplication. And again, make sure for this, you always do the parentheses first. So PEMDAS for this one. And then moving on to our last one, we're going to do examples of identity property of multiplication. So this one's a little bit different. We only have one line here because there's only one answer. So you're just going to find the answer and solve, and then I'll come back with the answer. So this one will probably only take you about 3 minutes. So if you can stop here for about 3 minutes and do that one. All right, so now moving on to the answers. So again, identity property was the one that we did that multiplies by 1, which always will give us that answer that's not 1. So we have 1 times 10, which gives me 10. And then I have 4 times 1, which gives me 4. And then I have 13 times 1, that gives me 13. And then I have 1 times 50 gives me 50. And then I have 5 times 1, which gives me 5. And then 1 times 91 gives me 91. So for all of these, we know that the number, again, times itself or times 1 will be itself. So shown in the example, that gives us the answer there. And then moving on to our last slide here, I have an extra practice called factors of multiplication. All right, so what we're going to do here is it says which property of multiplication is shown. So we know 12 times 1 equals 12. So I have these down here as my answers. There are two on here that we didn't learn. The 0, 1 is basically anything times 0. So that one's pretty self-explanatory. I know this one's going to be identity though. And then the distributive one is going to be similar to this, but not exactly the same. So for this one, we know that the answers will be the same once we multiply them. So this one's actually associative. Let's see if I can get to a distributive one. So this one's also associative. So this one, 2 times 3, 3 times 2 is going to be my commutative property of multiplication. Okay, so this one is going to be my distributive. So one side of the equal sign is going to have my parentheses and the other side will not. So I have to distribute what we're doing. So that one is going to be distributive. So it's going to look a little bit something like that, and then I'll keep asking you based on those together. So that's going to be the extra practice. I think it's really fun. It helps me remember which which properties go with which problems. So again, if you don't know them by heart, either you know the name or you know what it is, connecting those together for this game that we found would be really, really helpful for you guys, because moving forward, again, you'll need that a lot in math. So our last slide and our last thing is going to be our objective. So I can use properties of multiplication to identify each problem and solve. So that's what we did. We identified each property. Let me go back. We identified each property by going over the vocabulary, and then we did each property in an example, and then you guys solved it. So, and the lesson today, we did all of that, so that's perfect for you guys. If you wanted to do a little bit more, again, the extra practice wouldn't hurt, because it is a lot of material and content for you guys to learn, and it is super, super important. So thank you so much.